The Dark is Rising, Chapter 8, Christmas Day. When he knelt beside the Christmas tree and pulled off the gay paper wrapping from the giant box labeled Will, the first thing he discovered was that it was not a box at all, but a wooden crate. A Christmas choir warbled distant and joyful from the radio in the kitchen. It was the after-Christmas stocking, before breakfast gathering of the family, when each member opened just one of his tree presents. The rest of the bright pile would lie there until after dinner, happily tantalizing. Will, being the youngest, had the first turn. He had made a beeline for the box, partly because it was so impressively large and partly because he suspected it came from Stephen. He found that someone had taken the nails out of the wooden lid so that he could open it easily. "Robin pulled out the nails, and Bar and I put the paper on," said Mary at his shoulder, all agog. "But we didn't look inside. Come on, Will, come on." He took off the lid. "It's full of dead leaves, or reeds, or something." "Palm leaves," said his father, looking. "For packing, I suppose. Mind your fingers, they can have sharp edges." Will tugged out handfuls of the rustling fronds until the first hard shape of something began to show. It was a thin, strange, curving shape, brown, smooth like a branch. It seemed to be made of a hard kind of papier-mâché. It was an antler, like and yet not like the antler of a deer. Will paused suddenly. A strong and totally unexpected feeling had leapt out at him when he touched the antler. It was not a feeling he had ever had in the presence of a family before. It was the mixture of excitement, security, and delight that came over him whenever he was with one of the old ones. He saw an envelope poking out of the packing beside the antler and opened it. That paper bore the neat letterhead of Stephen's ship. "Dear Will, happy birthday, happy Christmas. I always swore never to combine the two, didn't I? And here I am doing it. Let me tell you why. I don't know whether you'll understand, especially after you see what the present is, but perhaps you will. You've always been a bit different from everybody else, and I don't mean daft, just different. It was like this. I was in the oldest part of Kingston one day during Carnival. Carnival in these islands is a very special time. Great fun, with echoes going back a long, long way. Anyway, I got mixed up in a procession, all laughing people and jingling steel bands and dancers in wild costumes, and I met an old man. He was a very impressive old man, his skin very black and his hair very white, and he sort of appeared out of nowhere and took me by the arm and pulled me out of the dancing. I'd never seen him in my life before, anywhere, I'm sure of it. But he looked at me and he said, 'You are Stephen Stanton of Her Majesty's Navy. I have something for you. Not for you yourself, but for your youngest brother, the seventh son. You will send it to him as a present for his birthday this year and his Christmas, combined in one. It will be a gift for you, from you, his brother, and he will know what to do with it in due course, although you will not.' It was all so unexpected it really knocked me off balance. All I could say was, 'But who are you? How do you know me?' And the old man just looked at me again with very dark, deep eyes that seemed to be looking through me into the day after tomorrow. And he said, 'I would know you anywhere. You are Will Stanton's brother. There is a look that we old ones have. Our families have something of it too.' And that was about it, Will. He didn't say another word. That last bit makes no sense, I know, but that was what he said. And then he just moved into the carnival procession and out again. And when he came out, he was wearing, the thing you will find in this box. So here I am sending it to you just as I was told. It seems mad, and I can think of lots of things you'd have liked better, but there it is. There was something extraordinary about that old man, and I just somehow had to do what he had told me. Hope you like your crazy present, mate. I'll be thinking of you both days. Love, Stephen." Slowly, Will folded the letter and put it back into its envelope. "A look that we old ones have." So the circle stretched all the way around the world. But of course it did. There would be no point in it otherwise. He was glad to have Stephen part of the pattern. It was right somehow. "Oh, come on, Will." Mary was hopping with curiosity, her dressing gown flapping. "Open it, open it." Will suddenly realized that his tradition-minded family had been standing patiently immobile, waiting for 5 minutes while he read his letter. Using the lid of the crate as a tray, he hastily began hauling out more and more palm leaf packing until finally The object inside was clear. He pulled it out, staggering as he took the weight, and everyone gasped. It was a giant carnival head, brilliant and grotesque. The colors were bright and crude, the features boldly made and easily recognizable, all done in the same smooth, light substance, like papier-mâché or a kind of grainless wood. And it was not the head of a man. Will had never seen anything like it before. The head from which the branching antlers sprang was shaped like the head of a stag, but the ears beside the horns were those of a dog or a wolf, and the face beneath the horns was a human face, but with the round, feather-edged eyes of a bird. There was a strong, straight human nose, a firm human mouth, set in a slight smile. There was not much else that was purely human about the thing at all. The chin was bearded, but the beard so shaped that it might as easily have been the chin of a goat or deer as of a man. The face could have been frightening, but when everyone had gasped, the sound Mary made and hastily muffled had been more like a small scream, but Will felt that its effect would depend on who was looking at it. The appearance was nothing. It was neither ugly, nor beautiful, frightening, nor funny. It was a thing made to call out deep responses from the mind. It was very much a thing of the old ones. "My word," his father said. "That's a funny sort of present," said James. His mother said nothing. Mary said nothing, but edged away a little. "Reminds me of someone I know," Robin said, grinning. Paul said nothing. Gwen said nothing. Max said softly, "Look at those eyes." Barbara said, "But what's it for?" Will ran his fingers over the strange, great face. It took him only a moment to find what he was looking for. It was almost invisible unless you were expecting it, engraved on the forehead between the horns, the imprint of a circle quartered by a cross. He said, "It's a West Indian carnival head. It's old. It's special. Stephen found it in Jamaica." James was beside him now, peering up inside the head. "There's a kind of wire framework that rests on your shoulders, and a slit where the mouth's just a bit open. I suppose you look out through that? Come on, Will, put it on." He heaved up the head from behind to slip it over Will's shoulders, but Will drew away, as some other part of his mind spoke silently to him. "Not now," he said. "Somebody else opened their present." And Mary forgot the head and her reaction to it in the happy instant of finding that it was her turn for Christmas. She dived at the pile of presents by the tree, and the cheerful discoveries began again. One present each, they had almost done, and it was almost time for breakfast when the knocking came at the front door. Mrs. Stanton had been about to reach for her own ritual parcel. Her arm dropped to her side, and she looked up blankly. Who on earth can that be? They all stared at one another, and then at the door as it might speak. This was all wrong, like a phrase of music changing in mid-melody. Nobody ever came to the house on this hour at Christmas Day. It was not in the pattern. "I wonder," said Mr. Stanton, with a faint surmise waking in his voice, and he pushed his feet more firmly into his slippers and got up to open the front door. They heard the door open. His back filled the space and stopped them from seeing the visitor, but his voice rose in obvious pleasure. "My dear chap, how very good of you! Come in, do come in." And as he turned back towards the living room, he was holding a small package in one hand that had not been there before, clearly a product of the tall figure that now loomed in the doorway, following him in. Mr. Stanton was beaming and glowing, busy with introduction. "Alice, love, this is Mr. Mydethan. So kind, all this way on Christmas morning just to deliver. Shouldn't have taken the Mydethan. My son Max, my daughter Gwen, James, Barbara." Will listened without attention to the grown-up politeness. It was only at the voice of the stranger that he glanced up. There was something familiar in the deep, slightly nasal voice with a trace of accent, carefully repeating the names. "How do you do, Mrs. Stanton? Compliments of the season to you, Max, Gwen." And Will saw the outline of the face and the longish red-brown hair, and he froze. It was the writer. This Mr. Mydethan, his father's friend from goodness knows where, was the Black Rider from somewhere outside time. Will seized the nearest thing to his hand, a sweep of bright cloth that was Stephen's present from Jamaica to his sister Barbara, and pulled it quickly over the carnival head to mask it from view. As he turned again, the rider raised his head to look further back into the room and saw him. He stared at Will, in open triumph challenge, a small smile on his lips. Mr. Stanton beckoned, flapping a hand. "Will, Come here a minute, my youngest son, Mr. Will was instantly a furious old one, so furious that he did not pause to think what he should do. He could feel every inch of himself as if he had grown in his rage to 3 times his own height. He stretched out his right hand with his fingers, spread stiff towards the family, and saw them instantly caught into a stop in time, frozen out of all movement. Like waxworks, they stood stiff and motionless round the room. "How dare you come in here?" he shouted at the writer. The two of them stood facing one another across the room, the only living and moving objects there. No human moved. The hands of the clock on the mantelpiece did not move, and though the flames of the fire flickered, they did not consume the logs that they burned. "How dare you, at Christmas, on Christmas morning? Get out!" It was the first time in his life he had ever felt such rage, and it was not pleasant. But he was outraged that the dark should have dared to interrupt this, his most precious family ritual. The writer said softly, "Contain yourself." In the old speech, his accent was suddenly much more marked. He smiled at Will without a flicker of change in his cold blue eyes. "I can cross your threshold, my friend, and pass your buried holly, because I have been invited. Your father, in good faith, asked me to enter the door, and he is the master of this house, and there is nothing you can do about that." "Yes, there is," Will said. Staring at the writer's confident smile, he focused all his powers in an effort to see into his mind, find what he intended to do there, but he came up sharp against a black wall of hostility, unbreakable. Will felt this should not be possible, and he was shaken. He groped angrily in his memory for the words of destruction with which, in the last resort, but only the very last resort, an old one might break the power of the dark, and the Black Rider laughed. "Oh, no, Will Stanton," he said easily. "That won't do. You cannot use weapons of that kind here, not unless you wish to blast your whole family out beyond time." He glanced pointedly at Mary, who stood unmoving next to him, her mouth half open, called out of her life in the middle of saying something to her father. "That would be a pity," the writer said. And then he looked back at Will, and the smile dropped from his face as if he had spat it away, and his eyes narrowed. "You young fool, do you think that for all your gift of gramarye, you can control me? Keep your place. You are not one of the masters yet. You may do things as best you can contrive, but the high powers are not for your mastering yet, and nor am I." "You are afraid of my masters," Will said suddenly, not knowing quite what he meant, but knowing it was true. The writer's pale face flushed. He said softly, "The dark is rising, old one, and this time we do not propose that anything shall hinder its way. This is the time for our rising, and these next 12 months shall see us established at last. Tell your masters that. Tell them that nothing shall stop us. Tell them all the things of power that they hope to possess we shall take from them. The Grail and the harp and the signs, we shall break your circle before it can ever be joined, and none shall stop the dark from rising." The last words keened out in a high shriek of triumph, and Will shivered. The writer stared at him, his pale eyes glittering. Then scornfully, he spread out his hands towards the Stantons, and at once they started into life again, and the bustle of Christmas was back, and there was nothing Will could do. "That box for?" Mary said. "Myddleton, this is our Will." Mr. Stanton put his hand on Will's shoulder. Will said coldly, "How do you do?" "The compliments of the season to you, Will," the writer said. "I wish you the same as you wish me," Will said. "Very logical," said the writer. "Very pompous, if you ask me," Mary said, tossing her head. "He's like that sometimes. Daddy, who is that box for that he brought?" "Mr. Myddleton, not he," said her father automatically. "For your mother. A surprise," the writer said. "Something that wasn't finished last night in time for your father to bring it home." "From you?" "From Daddy, I think," said Mrs. Stanton, smiling at her husband. She turned to the writer. "Will you have breakfast with us, Mr. Myddleton?" "He can't," said Will. "Will?" "He sees I'm in a hurry," the writer said smoothly. No, I thank you, Mrs. Stanton, but I am on the way to spend the day with friends, and I must be off." Mary said, "Where are you going?" "North of here. What long hair you have, Mary. Very pretty." "Thank you," said Mary smugly, shaking her long, loose hair back from her shoulders. The writer reached out and removed a stray hair delicately from her sleeve. "Allow me," he said politely. "She's always showing it off," James said calmly. Mary stuck out her tongue. The writer looked down the room again. That's a magnificent tree. A local one? It's a royal tree, James said, from the great park. Come and see. Mary grabbed the writer's hand and tugged him across. Will bit his lip and deliberately blanked out all thought of the carnival head from his mind by concentrating very hard on what he was likely to have for breakfast. The writer, he was fairly sure, could see into the top level of his mind, but not perhaps the ones buried deeper than that. But there was no danger, though the great empty box and its pile of exotic packing stood right beside him. The writer, surrounded by Stantons, simply peered obediently and admiringly at the ornaments on the tree. He seemed particularly taken with the tiny carved initials from Farmer Dawson's box. Beautiful, he said, absently twirling Mary's leaf-twined M, which, Will noticed vaguely, was hanging upside down. When he turned back to their parents, I must really go, and you must have your breakfasts. Will looks rather hungry, I think. There was a flash of malice as they looked at one another, and Will knew that he had been right about the limits of the dark scene. I'm really immensely grateful to you, Myddleton, Mr. Stanton said. No trouble at all. You were right on my way. Compliments of the season to you all. With a flurry of farewells, he was gone, striding down the path. Will rather regretted that his mother shut the door before they had a chance to hear a car's engine start up. He did not think the writer had come by car. Well, my love, said Mr. Stanton, giving his wife a kiss and handing her the box. There's your first tree present. Happy Christmas. Oh, said their mother when she opened it. Oh, Roger. Will squeezed past his burbling sisters to have a look. Nestled on white velvet in a box marked with the name of his father's shop was his mother's old-fashioned ring, the ring he had watched Mr. Stanton checking for loose stones some weeks before, the ring that Merriman had seen in the picture he took out of Will's mind, but encircling it was something else, a bracelet made as an enlargement of the ring, exactly matching it. A gold band set with 3 diamonds in the center and 3 rubies on either side, and engraved with an odd pattern of circles and lines and curves round them all. Will stared at it, wondering why the writer should have wanted to have it in his hands, for surely that must have been behind the visit this morning. No lord of the dark needed to enter any house merely to see what was inside. Did you make it, Dad? Said Max. Lovely bit of work. Thank you, said his father. Who was that man who brought it? Gwen said curiously. Does he work with you? Such a funny name. Oh, he's a dealer, Mr. Stanton said. In diamonds, mostly. Strange chap, but very pleasant. I've known him for a couple of years, I suppose. We get quite a lot of stones from his people, including these. He poked one finger gently at the bracelet. I had to leave early yesterday while young Geoffrey was still tightening one setting, and Myddleton happened to be in the shop and offered to drop it off to save me from coming back. As he said, he was coming past here this morning anyway. Still, it was good of him. He needn't have offered. Very nice, said his wife. But you're nicer. I think it's beautiful. I'm hungry, said James. What are we going to eat? It was only after the bacon and eggs, toast and tea, marmalade and honey were all gone, and the debris of the first present opening cleared away, that Will realized his letter from Stephen was nowhere to be found. He searched the living room, investigated everyone's belongings, crawled underneath the tree and around the waiting pile of still unopened presents, but it was not there. It might, of course, have been inadvertently thrown away in mistake for wrapping paper. Such things sometimes happen in their crowded Christmas day. But Will thought he knew what had happened to his letter, and he wondered whether, after all, it had been the chance of investigating his mother's ring that had brought the Black Rider to the house, or a quest for something else. Before long, they noticed that snow was falling again. Gently but inexorably, the flakes came fluttering down without once faltering. The footprints of Mr. Myddleton out on the path from door to drive were soon covered over, as if they had never been there. The dogs, Rack and Sigh, who had asked to go out before the snow began, came humbly scratching at the back door again. I'm all for a white Christmas now and then, said Max, staring morosely out, but this is ridiculous. Extraordinary, said his father, looking out over his shoulder. I have never known it like this at Christmas in my lifetime. If much more comes down today, there will be real transport problems all over the south of England. Well, that's what I was thinking, said Max. I'm supposed to be going to Southampton the day after tomorrow to stay with Deb. Oh, said James, clutching his chest. Max looked at him. Happy Christmas, Max, James said. Paul came clomping into the living room in boots, buttoning his overcoat. Snow or no snow, I'm off ringing. They old bells up in Thyseed Tower don't wait for no one. Any of you heathen mob come to church this morning? The Nightingales will be along, Max said, looking at Will and James, who between them constituted about 1/3 of the church choir. That should do you, don't you think? If you were to perform your seasonal good deed, said Gwen, passing, with some useful task like peeling the potatoes, then perhaps Mum could go. She does like to, when she can. The small, muffled group, which set out eventually into the thickening snow, consisted of Paul, James, Will, Mrs. Stanton, and Mary, who was, James said unkindly, but with truth, probably more interested in avoiding housework than in making her devotions. They plodded up the road, the snowflakes coming down harder now and beginning to sting their cheeks. Paul had gone ahead to join the other ringers, and soon the tumbling notes of the 6 sweet old bells that hung in the small square tower began chiming through the gray, whirling world around them, brightening it back into Christmas. Will's spirits rose a little at the sound, but not much. The heavy persistence of the new snow troubled him. He could not shake off the creeping suspicion that it was being sent as a forerunner of something else, by the dark. He thrust his hands deep into the pockets of his sheepskin jacket, and the fingertips of one hand found themselves curling round a rook's feather, forgotten since the dreadful night of Midwinter's Eve before his birthday. In the snowy road, 4 or 5 cars stood outside the church. There were more, usually on Christmas morning, but few villagers outside walking range had chosen to brave the swirling white fog. Will watched the fat white flakes lie determined and unmelting on his jacket sleeve. It was very cold. Even inside the little church, the snowflakes obstinately remained and took a long time to melt. He went with James and a handful of other choristers to struggle into surplices in the narrow vestry corridor, and then, as the bells merged into the beginning of the service, to make their procession down the aisle and up into the little gallery at the back of the small square nave. You could see everyone from there, and it was clear that the Church of St. James the Less was not Christmas crammed this year, but half full. The order of morning prayer, as were in this Church of England by the authority of Parliament in the 2nd year of the reign of King Edward VI, made its noble way through the Christmas pattern, led by the rector's unashamedly theatrical bass baritone. O ye frost and cold, bless ye the Lord, praise him and magnify him forever, sang Will, reflecting that Mr. Beaumont had shown a certain wry humor in choosing the canticle. O ye ice and snow, bless ye the Lord, praise him and magnify him forever. Suddenly he found himself shivering, but not from the words, nor from any sense of cold. His head swam. He clutched for a moment at the edge of the gallery. The music seemed to become, for a brief flash, hideously discordant, jarring at his eyes. And then it faded into itself again and was as before, leaving Will shaken and chilled. O ye light and darkness, sang James, staring at him. Are you all right? Sit down and magnify him forever. But Will shook his head impatiently, and for the rest of the service he sturdily stood, sang, sat, or knelt, and convinced himself that there had been nothing at all wrong except a vague feeling of faintness, brought on by what his elders liked to call over-excitement. And then the strange sense of wrongness, of discordance, came again. It was only once more at the very end of the service. Mr. Beaumont was booming out the prayer of St. Chrysostom, who dost promise that when 2 or 3 are gathered together in thy name, thou wilt grant their request. Noise broke suddenly into Will's mind, a shrieking and dreadful howling in place of the familiar cadences. He had heard it before. It was the sound of the besieging dark, which he had heard outside the manor hall, where he had sat with Merriman and the lady, in some century unknown. But in a church? Said Will, the Anglican choir boy, incredulous. Surely you can't feel it inside a church. Ah, said Will, the old one unhappily, any church of any religion is vulnerable to their attack, for places like this are where men give thought to matters of the light and the dark. He hunched his head down between his shoulders as the noise beat at him, and then it vanished again, and the rector's voice was ringing out alone as before. Will glanced quickly around him, but it was clear nobody else had noticed anything wrong. Through the folds of his white surplice, he gripped the 3 signs on his belt, but there was neither warmth nor cold under his fingers. To the warning power of the signs, he guessed a church was a kind of no man's land, since no harm could actually enter its walls. No warning against harm should be necessary. Yet, if the harm were hovering just outside... The service was over now, and everyone roaring out, "O come all ye faithful," in happy Christmas fervor, as the choir made their way down from the gallery and up to the altar. And then Mr. Beaumont's blessing went rolling out over the heads of the congregation, the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost. But the words could not bring Will peace, for he knew that something was wrong, something looming out of the dark, something waiting out there, and then when it came to the point, he must meet it alone, unstrengthened. He watched everyone file, beaming out of the church, smiling and nodding to each other as they gripped their umbrellas and turned up their collars against the swirling snow. He saw jolly Mr. Hutton, the retired director, twirling his car keys, enveloping tiny Miss Bell, their old teacher, in the warm offer of a ride home. And behind him, jolly Mrs. Hutton, a galleon in full furry sail, doing the same with limp Mrs. Pettigrew, the postmistress. Assorted village children scampered out of the door, escaping their best-hatted mothers, rushing to snowballs and Christmas turkey. Luxurious Mrs. Horniman stumped out next to Mrs. Stanton and Mary, busily foretelling doom. Will saw Mary, trying not to giggle, fall back to join Mrs. Dawson and her married daughter with the 5-year-old grandson prancing gaily in gleaming new cowboy boots. The choir, coated and muffled, began to leave too, with cries of "Happy Christmas!" and "See you on Sunday, Vicar!" to Mr. Beaumont, who would be giving only the service here today and the rest in his other parishes. The rector, talking music with Paul, smiled and waved vaguely. The church began to empty as Will waited for his brother. He could feel his neck prickling as though with the electricity that hangs strongly oppressive in the air before a giant storm. He could feel it everywhere. The air inside the church was charged with it. The rector, still chatting, reached out an absent-minded hand and turned off the lights inside the church, leaving it in a gray, cold murk, brighter only beside the door where the whiteness of the snow reflected in. And Will, seeing some figures move towards the door out of the shadows, realized that the church was not empty after all. Down there by the little 12th century font, he saw Farmer Dawson, old George, and old George's son John, the smith, with his silent wife. The old ones of the circle were waiting for him to support him against whatever lurked outside. Will felt weak for a moment as relief washed over him in a great warm wave. "All ready, Will?" said the rector genially, pulling on his overcoat. He went on, still preoccupied, to Paul. "Of course, I do agree the double concerto is one of the best. I only wish he'd record the unaccompanied Bach suites. Heard him do them in a church in Edinburgh once at the festival. Marvelous!" Paul, sharper-eyed, said, "Is anything wrong, Will?" "No," Will said. "That is, no." He was trying desperately to think of some way of getting the 2 of them outside the church before he came near the door himself. Before whatever might happen did happen. By the church door he could see the old ones move slowly into a tight group, supporting one another. He could feel the force, now very strong, very close, all around. The air was thick with it. Outside the church was destruction and chaos, the heart of the dark, and he could think of nothing that he could do to turn it aside. And then, as the rector and Paul turned to walk through the nave, he saw both of them pause in the same instant, and their heads go up like the heads of wild deer on alert. It was too late now. The voice of the dark was so loud that even humans could sense its power. Paul staggered as if someone had pushed him in the chest and grabbed a pew for support. "What is that?" he said huskily. "Rector, what on earth is it?" Mr. Beaumont had turned very white. There was a glistening of sweat on his forehead, though the church was very cold again now. "Nothing on earth, I think, perhaps," he said. "God forgive me," and he stumbled a few paces nearer the church door, like a man struggling through waves in the sea, and leaning forward slightly, made a sweeping sign of the cross. He stammered out, Defend us, thy humble servants, in all assaults of our enemies, that we, surely trusting in thy defense, may not fear the power of any adversaries." Farmer Dawson said very quietly but clearly from the group beside the door, "No, Rector." The rector seemed not to hear him. His eyes were wide, staring out at the snow. He stood transfixed. He shook like a man with fever. The sweat came running down his cheeks. He managed to half raise one arm and point behind him. "Vestry," he gasped out. "Book. On table. Exercise." "Poor brave fellow," said John Smith in the old speech. "This battle is not for his fighting. He is bound to think so. Of course, being in his church." "Be easy, Reverend," said his wife in English. Her voice was soft and gentle, strongly of the country. The rector stared at her like a frightening animal, but by now all his powers of speech and movement had been taken away. Frank Dawson said, "Come here, Will." Pushing against the dark, Will came forward, slowly. He touched Paul on the shoulder as he passed, looking into puzzled eyes and a face as twisted and helpless as the rector's, and he said softly, "Don't worry. It'll be all right soon." Each of the old ones touched him gently as he came into the group, as if joining him to them, and Farmer Dawson took him by the shoulder. He said, "We must do something to protect those two, Will, or their minds will bend. They cannot stand the pressure. The dark will send them mad. You have the power, and the rest of us do not." It was Will's first intimation that he could do anything another old one could not. But there was no time for wonder. With the gift of gramarye, he closed off the minds of his brother and the rector behind a barrier that no power of any kind could break through. It was a perilous undertaking, since he, the maker, was the only one who could remove the barrier, and if anything were to happen to him, the two protected ones would be left like vegetables, incapable of any communication, forever. But the risk had to be taken. There was nothing else to be done. Their eyes closed gently as if they had gone quietly to sleep, and they stood very still. After a moment their eyes opened again, but were tranquil and empty, unaware. "All right," said Farmer Dawson. "Now." The old ones stood in the doorway of the church, and their arms linked together. None spoke a word to another. Wild noise and turbulence rose outside. The light darkened, the wind howled and whined, the snow whirled in and whipped their faces with white chips of ice, and suddenly the rooks were in the snow, hundreds of them, black flurries of malevolence, cawing and croaking, diving down at the porch and shrieking attack and then swooping up away. They could not come close enough to claw and tear. It was as if an invisible wall made them fall back within inches of their targets. But that would be only for as long as the old one's strength could hold. In a wild storm of black and white, the dark attacked, beating at their minds as at their bodies, and above all driving hard at the sign-seeker, Will. And Will knew that if he had been on his own mind, his mind, for all its gifts of protection, would have collapsed. It was the strength of the circle of the old ones that held him fast now. But for the second time in his life, even the circle could do no more than hold the power of the dark at bay. Even together, the old ones could not drive it back. And there was no lady now to bring aid to a greater kind. Will realized once more, helplessly, that to be an old one was to be very old before the proper time, for the fear he began to feel now was worse than the blind terror he had known in his attic bed, worse than the fear the dark had put into him in the great hall. This time his fear was adult, made of experience and imagination and care for others. It was the worst of all. In the moment that he knew this, he knew, too, that he, Will, was the only means by which his own fear could be overcome, and thus the circle fortified and the dark driven away. "Who are you?" he asked himself, and he answered, "You are the sign-seeker. You have 3 of the signs, half the circle of things of power. Use them." The sweat was standing on his own forehead now as it had done on the rector's, though now the rector and Paul stood in smiling peace, oblivious outside everything that was going on. Will could see the strain on the faces of the others, Farmer Dawson most of all. Slowly he moved his hands inwards, bringing the hands each held closer to one another, John Smith's left hand nearer to Farmer Dawson's right, and then they were close enough he joined his neighbor's hands, shutting himself out. For a panicky moment he clutched them again as if he were tightening a knot, and then he let go and stood alone. Unprotected now by the circle, though sheltered behind it, he swayed under the impact of the raging ill will outside the church. Then, moving very deliberately, he unclasped his belt with its 3 precious burdens and draped it over his arm, took from his pocket the rook's feather, and wove it into the center sign, the bronze quartered circle, and then he took the belt in both his hands, holding it up before him, and moved slowly round until he stood alone in the church porch, facing the howling, rook screaming, icy dark beyond. He had never felt so lonely before. He did nothing. He thought nothing. He stood there and let the signs work for themselves. And suddenly there was silence. The flapping birds were gone. The wind howled. The dreadful, mad humming that had filled the air and the mind was vanished altogether. Every nerve and muscle in Will's body went limp as the tension disappeared. Outside, the snow still quietly fell, and the flakes were smaller now. The old ones looked at one another and laughed. "The full circle will do the real job," said old George. "But half a circle can do a lot, eh, young Will?" Will looked down at the signs in his hand and shook his head in wonder. Farmer Dawson said softly, "In all my days since the Grail disappeared, that's the first time I've seen anything but the mind of one of the great ones drive back the dark. Things, this time. They did it alone, for all our willing. We have things of power again. It has been a long, long time." Will was still looking at the signs, staring as if he held his eyes for some purpose. "Wait," he said abstractedly. "Don't move. Stay still for a moment." They paused, startled, and the smith said, "Is there trouble?" "Look at the signs," Will said. "Something's happening to them. They're glowing." He turned slowly, still holding the belt with the 3 signs as before, until his body was blocking the gray light from the door, and his hands were in the gloom of the church, and the signs grew brighter and brighter, each of them glowing with a strange inward light. The old one stared. "Is it the power of driving back the dark?" said John Smith's wife in her soft lilt. "Is it something in them that was sleeping and begins to wake now?" Will was trying vainly to sense what the signs were telling him. "I think it's a message. It means something, but I can't get through." The light poured out of the 3 signs, filling their half of the dark little church with brilliance. It was a light like sunlight, warm and strong. Nervously, Will reached out a finger to touch the nearest circle, the sign of iron, but it was neither hot nor cold. Farmer Dawson said suddenly, "Look up there!" His arm was out, pointing up the nave towards the altar, and in the instant they turned, they saw what he had seen, another light blazing from the wall, just as beside them the light blazed from the signs. It shone out like the beam from a great torch. And Will understood. He said happily, "So that's why." He walked up towards the second patch of brilliance, carrying the belt and the signs, so that the shadows on the pews and on the beams of the roof moved with him as he went. As the 2 lights grew closer and closer together, each seemed to grow brighter still, with Frank Dawson's tall, heavy form looming behind him. Will paused in the middle of the shaft of brilliance, reaching out from the wall. It looked as if a slit window were letting light through for some unimaginable bright room beyond. He saw that the light was coming from something very small, as long as one of his fingers lying on its side. He said with certainty to Mr. Dawson, "I must take it quickly, you know, while the light still shines from it. If the light is not shining, it can't be found at all." And putting the belt with the sign of iron and the sign of bronze and the sign of wood into Frank Dawson's hands, he went forward to the light-cleft wall and reached in to the small source of the enchanted beam. The glowing thing came out of the wall easily from a break in the stucco where the chiltern flints of the wall showed through. It lay on his palm, a circle quartered by a cross. It had not been cut into that shape, even through the light in it. Will could see the smooth roundness of the sides that told him this was a natural flint, grown in the Chiltern chalk 15 million years ago. "The sign of stone," Farmer Dawson said. His voice was gentle and reverent, his dark eyes unreadable. "We have the 4th sign, Will." Together they walked back to join the others, carrying the bright things of power. The 3 old ones watched in silence. Paul and the rector now sat tranquil in a pew as if sleeping. Will stood with his fellows and took the belt and threaded on the sign of stone to stand there next to the other three. He had to squint through half-closed eyes to keep the brightness from blinding him. And then, when the fourth sign was in position next to the rest, all the light in them died. They were dark and quiet as they had been before, and the sign of stone showed itself as a smooth and beautiful thing with the gray-white surface of an undamaged flint. The black rook's feather was still woven into the sign of bronze. Will took it out. He did not need it now. When the light went out of the signs, Paul and the rector stirred. They opened their eyes, startled to find themselves sitting in a pew when a moment ago it seemed to them they had been standing. Paul jumped up instinctively, his head turning, questing. "It's gone," he said. He looked at Will, and a peculiar expression of puzzlement and wonder and awe came over his face. His eyes traveled down to the belt in Will's hands. "What happened?" he said. The rector stood up, his smooth, plump face creased in an effort to make sense of the incomprehensible. "Certainly it has gone," he said, looking slowly round the church. "Whatever influence it was, the Lord be praised." He, too, looked at the signs on Will's belt, and he glanced up again, smiling, suddenly, an almost childish smile of relief and delight. "That did the work, didn't it? The cross? Not of the church, but a Christian cross nonetheless." "Very old, them crosses are, Rector," said old George unexpectedly firm and clear. "Made a long time before Christianity, long before Christ." The rector beamed at him. "But not before God," he said simply. The old ones looked at him. There was no answer that would not have offended him, so no one tried to give him. Except, after a moment, Will. "There's not really any before and after, is there?" he said. "Everything that matters is outside time and comes from there and can go there." Mr. Beaumont turned to him in surprise. "You mean infinity, of course, my boy." "Not altogether," said the old one that was Will. I mean the part of all of us, and of all the things we think and believe. That has nothing to do with yesterday or today or tomorrow because it belongs at a different kind of level. Yesterday is still there on that level. Tomorrow is there too. You can visit either of them, and all gods are there, and all the things that they have stood for. And," he added sadly, "the opposite too." "Will," said the rector, staring at him, "I'm not sure whether you should be exorcised or ordained. You and I must have some long talks very soon." "Yes, we must," Will said equably. He buckled on his belt, heavy with its precious burden. He was thinking hard and quickly as he did so, and the chief image before his mind was not Mr. Beaumont's disturbed theological assumptions, but Paul's face. He had seen his brother looking at him with a kind of fearful remoteness that bit into him with the pain of a whiplash. It was more than he could stand. His two worlds must not meet so closely. He raised his head, gathering all his powers, spread straight the fingers of both his hands and pointed one hand at each of them. "You will forget," he said softly in the old speech. "Forget, forget." "In a church in Edinburgh once, marvelous," the rector said to Paul, reaching to do up the top button on his overcoat. "The sarabande in the fifth suite literally had me in tears. He's the greatest cellist in the world, without a doubt." "Oh, yes," said Paul. "Oh, yes, he is." He hunched his shoulders inside his own coat. "Has Mum gone ahead, Will? Hey, Mr. Dawson, hello, Happy Christmas!" And he beamed and nodded at the rest as they all turned towards the church porch and the scattered flakes of drifting snow. "Happy Christmas, Paul, Mr. Beaumont," said Farmer Dawson gravely. "A nice service, sir, very nice." "Ah, seasonal warmth, Frank," said the rector. "A wonderful season, too. Nothing can interfere with our Christmas services, not even all this snow." Laughing and chatting, they went out into the white world where the snow lay mounded over the invisible tombstones and the white fields stretched down to the freezing Thames. There was no sound anywhere, no disturbance, only the occasional murmur of a car passing on the distant Bath Road. The rector turned aside to find his motorbike. The rest of them went on in a cheerful straggle to take their respective paths home. Two black rooks were perched on the lych gate as Will and Paul drew close. They rose into the air slowly, half-hopping, dark, incongruous shapes against the white snow. One of them passed close to Will's feet and dropped something there, giving a deprecatory croak as he passed. Will picked it up. It was a glossy horse chestnut from the rook's wood, as fresh as if it had ripened only yesterday. He and James always collected such nuts from the wood in early autumn for their school games of conkers, but he had never seen one as large and round as this. "There now," said Paul, amused, "you have a friend bringing you an extra Christmas present." "A peace offering, perhaps," said Frank Dawson, behind them, with no trace of expression in his deep Buckinghamshire voice. "And then again, perhaps not. Happy Christmas, lads. Enjoy your dinner." And the old ones were gone up the road. Will picked up the conker. "Well, I never," he said. They closed the church gate, knocking a shower of snow from its flat iron bars. Round the corner came the coughing roars of a motorcycle as the rector tried to kick his steed into life. And then a few feet ahead of them, on the trampled snow, the rook flew down again. It walked backwards and forwards irresolutely and looked at Will. "Gark," it said, very gently, for a rook. "Gark, gark, gark." And then it walked a few paces forward to the churchyard fence, jumped down again into the churchyard, and walked back a few paces as before. The invitation could hardly have been more obvious. "Gark," said the rook again, louder. The ears of an old one know that birds do not speak with the precision of words. Instead, they communicate emotion. There are many kinds and degrees of emotion, and there are many kinds of expression, even in the language of a bird. But although Will could tell that the rook was obviously asking him to come and look at something, he could not tell whether or not the bird was being used by the dark. He paused, thinking of what the rooks had done, and then he fingered the shiny brown chestnut in his hand. "All right, bird," he said. "One quick look." He went back through the gate, and the rook, croaking like an old swinging door, walked clumsily ahead of him up the church path and round the corner. Paul watched, grinning, and then he saw Will suddenly stiffen as he reached the corner, vanish for a moment, and then reappear. "Paul, come quick! There's a man in the snow!" Paul called the rector, who had just begun pushing his cycle up the road to start it there, and together they came running. Will was bending over a hunched figure, lying in the angle between the church wall and the tower. There was no movement, and the snow had already covered the man's clothes half an inch thick with its cold, feathery flakes. Mr. Beaumont moved Will gently aside and knelt, turning the man's head and feeling for a pulse. "He's alive, thank God, but very cold. The pulse isn't very good. He must have been here long enough for most men to die of exposure. Look at the snow. Let's get him inside." "In the church?" "Well, of course." "Let's take him to our house," Paul said impulsively. "It's only just round the corner, after all. It's warm and a lot better, at any rate, until an ambulance or something can come." "A wonderful idea," said Mr. Beaumont warmly. "Your good mother is a Samaritan, I know. Just until Dr. Armstrong can be called. We certainly can't leave the poor fellow here. I don't think there's a broken bone. Heart trouble, probably." He tucked his heavy cycle gloves under the man's head to keep it from the snow, and Will saw the face for the first time. He said in alarm, "It's the walker." They turned to him. "Who?" "An old tramp who hangs around. Paul, we can't take him home. Can't we get him to Dr. Armstrong's surgery?" "In this?" Paul waved a hand at the darkening sky. The snow was whirling round them, thicker again, and the wind was higher. "But we can't take him with us. Not the walker. He'll bring back the—" He stopped suddenly, halfway through the yelp. "Oh," he said helplessly. "Of course. You can't remember, can you?" "Don't worry, Will. Your mother won't mind. A poor man in extremis—" Mr. Beaumont was bustling now. He and Paul carried the walker to the gate like a muffled heap of ancient clothes. He managed finally to start the motorcycle, and they propped the inert shape on it somehow. And then, half riding, half pushing, the strange little group made its way to the Stantons' house. Will glanced behind him once or twice, but the rook was nowhere to be seen. "Well, well," said Max fastidiously as he came down into the dining room. "Now I've really met a dirty old man." "He smelled," Barbara said. "You're telling me. Dad and I gave him a bath. My Lord, you should have seen him. Well, no, you shouldn't. Put you off your Christmas dinner. Anyway, he's as clean as a newborn babe now. Dad even washed his hair and his beard, and Mum's burning his horrible old clothes, when she's made sure there's nothing valuable in them." "Not much danger of that, I don't think," said Gwen, on her way in from the kitchen. "Here, move your arm. This dish is hot." "We should lock up all the silver," said James. "What silver?" said Mary witheringly. "Well, Mum's jewelry, then, and the Christmas presents. Tramps always steal things." "This one won't be stealing much for a time." said Mr. Stanton, coming to his place at the head of the table with a bottle of wine and a corkscrew. "He's ill, and fast asleep now, snoring like a camel." "Have you ever heard a camel snore?" said Mary. "Yes," said her father, "and ridden one. So there. When's the doctor coming, Max? Pity to interrupt his dinner, poor man." "He didn't," said Max. "He's out delivering a baby, and they don't know when he'll be back. The woman was expecting twins." "Oh, Lord. Well, the old boy must be all right if he's asleep. Just needs rest, I expect. Though I must say he seemed a bit delirious, all that weird talk coming out." Gwen and Barbara brought in more dishes of vegetables. In the kitchen their mother was making impressive clattering noises with the oven. "What weird talk?" said Will. "Goodness knows," said Robin. "It was when we first took him up. He sounded like a language unknown to human ear. Maybe he comes from Mars." "I only wish he did," Will said. "Then we could send him back." But a shout of approval had greeted his mother, beaming over the glossy brown turkey, and nobody heard him. They turned on the radio in the kitchen while they were doing the washing up. "Heavy snow is falling again over the south and west of England," said the impersonal voice. "The blizzard, which has been raging for 12 hours in the North Sea, is still immobilizing all shipping on the southeast coast. The Sutton docks closed down this morning due to power failures and transport difficulties caused by heavy snow and temperatures approaching zero. Snowdrifts blocking roads have isolated villages in many remote areas. The British Rail is fighting numerous electrical failures and minor derailments caused by the snow. A spokesman said this morning that the public is advised not to travel by rail except in case of emergency." There was a sound of rustling paper. The voice went on. "The freak storms which have intermittently raged over the south of England for the last few days are not expected to diminish until after the Christmas holiday. The meteorological office said this morning. Fuel shortages have worsened in the southeast, and householders have been asked not to use any form of electrical heating between the hours of 9 a.m. and midday or 3 and 6 p.m. "Poor old Max," Gwen said. "No trains? Perhaps he can hitchhike." Listen. A spokesman for the Automobile Association said today that road travel was at present extremely inadvisable on all roads except major motorways. He added that motorists stranded in heavy snowstorms should, if possible, remain with their vehicles until the snow stops, unless the driver is quite certain of his location and knows he can reach help within 10 minutes. The spokesman said he should on no account leave his car. The voice went on, among exclamations and whistles, but Will turned away. He had heard enough. These storms could not be broken by the old ones without the power of the full circle of signs. And by sending the storms, the dark hoped to stop him from completing the circle. He was trapped. The dark was spreading its shadow, not only over his quest, but over the ordinary world, too. From the moment the writer had invaded his cozy Christmas that morning, Will had watched the dangers grow, but he had not anticipated this wider threat. For days now he had been too much caught up in his own perils to notice those of the outside world. But so many people were threatened now by the snow and cold. The very young, the very old, the weak, the ill. The walker won't have a doctor tonight, that's certain, he thought. It's a good job he isn't dying. The walker. Why was he here? There had to be some meaning behind it. Perhaps he had simply been hovering for his own reasons, and been blasted by the attack of the dark on the church. But if so, why had the Rook, an agent of the dark, brought Will to save him from freezing to death? Who was the walker, anyway? Why could all the powers of Grimmarai tell him nothing about the old man at all? There were carols on the radio again. Will thought bitterly. Happy Christmas, world. His father, passing, slapped him on the back. Cheer up, Will. It's bound to stop tonight. You'll be tobogganing tomorrow. Come on, time to open the rest of the presents. If we keep Mary waiting any longer, she'll explode. Will went to join his cheerful, noisy family. Back in the cozy, brilliant cave of the long room with the fire and the glowing tree, it was untouched Christmas for a while, just as it had always been. And his mother and father and Max had joined to give him a new bicycle, with racing handlebars and 11 gear speeds. Will was never quite sure whether what happened that night was a dream. In the darkest part of the night, the small, chill hours that are the first of the next day, he woke, and Merriman was there. He stood towering beside the bed in a faint light that seemed to come from within his own form. His face was shadowed, inscrutable. Wake up, Will, wake up. There is a ceremony we must attend. In an instant Will was standing. He found that he was fully dressed with the signs on their belt round his waist. He went with Merriman to the window. It was mounded to half its height with snow, and still the flakes were quietly falling. He said, suddenly desolate, "Isn't there anything we can do to stop it? They're freezing half the country, Merriman. People will be dying." Merriman shook his white-maned head slowly, heavily. "The dark has its strongest power of all rising between now and the 12th day. This is their preparing. Theirs is a cold strength. The winter feeds it. They mean to break the circle forever, but before it is too late for them. We shall all face a hard test soon, but not all things go according to their will. Much magic still flows untapped along the old one's ways, but we may find more hope in a moment. Come." The window ahead of them flew open outwards, scattering all the snow. A faint luminous path like a broad ribbon lay ahead, stretching into the snow-flecked air. Looking down, Will could see through it, see the snow-mounded outlines of roofs and fences and trees below. Yet the path was substantial too. In one stride, Merriman had reached it through the window and was sweeping away at great speed with an eerie, gliding movement. Vanishing into the night, Will leapt after him, and the strange path swept him too, off through the night, with no feeling either of speed or cold. The night around him was black and thick. Nothing was to be seen except the glimmer of the old one's airy way. And then all at once they were in some bubble of time, hovering, tilted on the wind, as Will had learned from his eagle of the Book of Gramarye. "Watch," Merriman said, and his cloak swirled around Will as if in protection. Will saw in the dark sky, or in his own mind, a group of great trees, leafless, towering over a leafless hedge, wintry but without snow. He heard a strange thin music, a high piping accompanied by a small constant thump of a drum, playing over and over again a single melancholy tune. And out of the deep dark and into the ghostly grove of trees, a procession came. It was a procession of boys in clothes of some time long past, tunics and rough leggings. They had hair to their shoulders and bag-like caps of a shape he had never seen before. They were older than he, about 15, he guessed. They had the half-solemn expressions of players in a game of charades, mingling earnest purpose with the bubbling sense of fun. At the front came boys with sticks and bundles of birch twigs, but at the back were the players of pipe and drum. Between these, 6 boys carried a kind of platform made of reeds and branches woven together, with a bunch of holly at each corner. It was like a stretcher, Will thought, except that they were holding it at shoulder height. He thought at first that it was no more than that and empty, and then he saw that it had supported something very small. On a cushion of ivy leaves in the center of the woven bier lay the body of a minute bird, a dusty brown bird, neat build. It was a wren. Merriman's voice said softly over his head out of the darkness, "It is the hunting of the wren, performed every year since men can remember at the solstice. But this is a particular year, and we may see more if all is well. Hope in your heart, Will, that we may see more." And as the boys and their sad music moved on through the sky trees and yet did not seem to pass, Will saw with a catch in his breath that instead of that little bird, there was growing the dim shape of a different form on the bier. Merriman's hand clutched at his shoulder like a steel clamp, though the big man made no sound. Lying on the bed of ivy between the 4 holly tufts now was no longer a tiny bird, but a small, fine-boned woman, very old, delicate as a bird, robed in blue. The hands were folded on the chest, and on one finger glimmered a ring with a huge rose-colored stone. In the same instant, Will saw the face and knew that it was the lady. He cried out in pain, "But you said she wasn't dead!" "No more she is," Merriman said. The boys walked to their music. The bier with the silent form lying there came close, and then moved ahead, vanishing with the procession into the night, and the piping sad tune and the drum beats dwindled after it. But on the very edge of disappearance, the 3 boys who had been playing paused, put down their instruments, and turned to stand gazing without expression at Will. One of them said, "Will Stanton, beware the snow." The second one said, "The lady will return, but the dark is rising." The third, in a quick sing-song tune, chanted something that Will recognized as soon as it began. When the dark comes rising, 6 shall turn it back, 3 from the circle and 3 from the track. Wood, bronze, iron, water, fire, stone, 5 will return, and 1 go alone. But the boy did not end there as Merriman had done. He went on. Iron for the birthday, bronze carried long, wood from the burning, stone out of song. Fire in the candle ring, water from the thaw, 6 signs the circle, and the grail gone before. Then a great wind came up out of nowhere, and in a flurry of snowflakes and darkness, the boys were gone, whirled away, and Will, too, felt himself whirling backwards, back through time, back along the shining way of the old ones. The snow lashed at his face, the night was in his eyes, stinging. Out of the darkness he heard Merriman calling to him urgently, but with a new hope and resonance in his deep voice. Danger rises with the snow, Will. Be wary of the snow. Follow the signs. Beware the snow. And Will was back in his room, back in his bed, falling into sleep, with the one ominous word ringing in his head like the chiming of the deepest church bell over the mounting snow. Beware. Beware.